The Sony RX100 Mark IV is the newest version to Sony's popular, pocketable, and powerful, point and shoot. I've been using this camera for a few weeks and I want to share some thoughts with you. So let's take a quick look at the specs of the Sony RX100 Mark IV. We've got a 20 megapixel sensor capable of 4K video for the first time, also capable of super slow-mo video at 960 frames per second, almost 1,000 frames per second. An improved autofocus system that's capable of 16 frames per second still photos, a tiltable LCD, and a tiny pop-up viewfinder. The lens offers a 24-70 with a max aperture of f1.8 to f2.8 as you zoom. And it can truly fit in all but the slimmest pockets, though you are going to feel the weight as this is quite a dense little camera. So I'm going to just touch on a few of the features that I love about this little Sony, and first off, the 4K video looks beautiful. It is limited to about 5 minutes of recording time at a clip, but it looks great. Another really fun feature that's been added in this that I enjoy using is that super slow-mo at 960 frames per second. There are some serious limitations, like just 4 seconds of recording time and quite a confusing recording setup. I'll share some tips with you for using that in just a minute. You also have 480 and 240 frames per second. That's all at 1080, but again, it's all limited to about 4 seconds of recording time, even at those slightly slower frame rates. The tilting screen is great for awkward angles, getting low, getting high, selfies, and of course, vlogging. I do wish the screen was touch sensitive though. A camera this small makes some sacrifices in physical controls. Picking a focus point, for instance, requires a few more button presses than I would like. A touchscreen would easily fix that, as well as give easier access to some additional features. I imagine that will be coming in the Mark V, or at the very least Mark VI. The customizable control dial can be assigned various functions, giving more manual control to an otherwise very compact camera. The little pop-up viewfinder can be useful in brighter situations when the screen is hard to see, but it'd be nice to have a hot shoe. That's something Sony got rid of with the switch to the EVF on the Mark III. Overall, image quality is excellent. Just a great little camera. But let's chat about some of the drawbacks to this camera. As I mentioned, the controls are quite cramped and it doesn't feel great in my hands. You might say, well, yeah, if it's going to fit in your pocket, it needs to be small. But if you're like me and that in-hand feel and quick manual control is more important, you might want to sacrifice some of the small size and step up to something that's a little bit larger that offers many of the same features like the Panasonic LX100. The high-speed video, yes, I listed that as something I love about this camera, but with only 4 seconds of recording time, sometimes even a little bit less, you need to carefully think about what and how you are shooting, or you might miss it. A fast SDX card is also needed, or the camera's going to limit your recording options to none of that high frame rate stuff. One small annoyance, and again, you make sacrifices with a camera this small, but the tripod socket does block access to both the battery and the SD card slot. So if you're on a tripod and you run out of battery, which is possible with this, or you need to switch the SD card, you're going to have to take it off the tripod. And another drawback to this camera is the price. At almost $1,000, it's not cheap. And if you've been paying careful attention to this series, you'll know that the differences between this Mark IV and the Mark III are mostly the addition of 4K and slow-mo. So for photographers, you could save a few hundred and pick up the Mark III, or even the Mark II, which is almost half the price. There is one more improvement worth mentioning though for photographers shooting in Aperture Priority often. You can more precisely control the auto ISO settings for this camera now. It works better for your style of shooting. I go back and forth about whether or not I recommend the Aperture Priority. You can run into instances where your shutter speed is dropping low enough that you're getting blur. But now being able to dial in that auto ISO so that it blocks you from hitting those lower limits, but your ISO will raise instead, is a nice option. The bottom line on this camera, if you need a 4K capable, truly pocketable camera with excellent quality, this is an awesome option for you. If you don't care about video features or the better auto ISO, you'll likely be just as happy with the similar but cheaper older versions. And before I leave, I want to show you that slow-mo setup in more detail. The language used by Sony in this mode can be quite confusing. The first step in shooting the higher frame rate with the Sony is to switch to the HFR mode on the dial, which stands for high frame rate. When you switch to the high frame rate mode, you have the option of shooting with manual exposure, shutter speed, aperture, or program. You're fairly limited in the settings you can choose. I'm going to go ahead and put it on manual anyway though, and I'll show you in a second what I mean by that. When you're shooting at the very high frame rates, your shutter speed is limited here to the slowest being 1/1000th of a second. You can go higher, but you can't go slower. You can, of course, adjust your aperture depending on your zoom. f2.8, because I'm zoomed slightly, is my maximum right now. Now, to change your other high frame rate settings, you go into the menu and find the record setting, HFR settings. And in here, you have the record setting again, 60, 30, or 24. I'll show you how that affects it in just a second. You have your high speed frame rate, 240, 480, or 960. So right now we have a 32 slow motion. If we come up here to our record setting, you can also think of this as your playback setting. That's going to affect your total slow motion. If I play it back at 60, twice the frame rate, my slow motion is cut down to just 16. If I go down to 24, I can get all the way up to 40 slow motion. So I'm going to leave it on 30 for now. I found that to be quite good, and as I showed you, 960, 480, or 240. Priority time, priority setting can be quality or shoot time priority. Shoot time priority gives you just a little bit more length to this high speed or slow-mo video. Quality, I honestly haven't seen a huge difference in either quality or the amount of time you can record. We might be talking about a difference of a second, maybe a second and a half. For what you're shooting, that might matter. Otherwise, I'd say leave it on quality. You can actually have it so that the high-speed recording starts when you hit the button or it ends when you hit the button. I leave it on start, but again, if you are capturing somebody jumping into the water, like that example I've shown a couple times now, maybe you want it to end right when that person hits the water, and so that way you don't have to kind of figure out how long they're going to be in the air for if you're trying to capture the splash. So you can then hit the button at the end of it. But I'm going to leave it on start trigger now. So I press all OK. Oop. So we can just get out of here now for that. Now, as I showed you, I could make those settings. I could also zoom in a little bit or zoom out. But once I hit this middle button on the dial, I'm now in my high frame rate recording ready mode. And now I can't make any changes. I can't get into the menu. I can't zoom. All of that stuff is invalid. But what I can do is hit the record button. And it says buffering. But what it's actually doing was recording. Now it says recording, and what it's actually doing is, well, writing that high frame rate to the card and playing it back. If I hit cancel, it's only going to save what we see has progressed so far. So if I want the whole thing, I have to wait for it to play this out. If I only wanted a portion that's been shown already, I can simply hit the cancel. Now you can see that 4 seconds of real time at high frame rate translates to a significant length of time. So just keep that in mind, and again, figure out how you want to best set this up and the frame rate you want to best set it up at. If you appreciated this video, take a moment to press the thumbs up button, and if you're not already a subscriber and want to be notified of future videos including reviews, tips, tricks, and more, take a moment and press that subscribe button. And if you'd like to, you can follow me on Instagram for more behind the scenes, posts, thoughts, and additional ways to ask me questions. Thanks so much for watching.